Hi, I'm Bethany Donham, preschool pastor here at Willowbrook, and today I get to talk a little bit with you about Ruth chapter 2. I think it's important to note a little bit about who Ruth was. As you read in chapter 1, she is a widow, which meant, especially back in those days, she was most likely very poor, and she was very poor. But she was also very faithful and loyal. We know that she went back to Bethlehem with her mother-in-law after her husband passed away and decided to help take care of her and offer her companionship in that way. But that also meant she was a foreigner. It meant that she didn't have the companionship of her friends that she knew back home or her family that she was familiar with. So she's alone. She's living this lifestyle with her mother-in-law alone. But we also know that she was a very hard worker. She took initiative to go glean in the fields. She didn't just sit around and wait for a spiritual feeling to get up one day and go and do it. She just did it to take care of herself and her mother-in-law. And she was content to do that. We don't see her longing for the life she used to have or to be in a different circumstance that she was in. She was very content. But I think what sticks out to me most about her is that she is very humble. Back in those days, it was Israeli law for her to be able to go glean in the fields. It was a form of welfare for widows and for the poor to be able to get the leftovers of the landowners back then. She could just go and take it if she wanted to. But in verse 7, she has said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." So she wasn't entitled. She didn't, even all the bad things that have happened to her, she still wasn't feeling entitled. And Boaz, as we need to take notice, was a man of great wealth. He was well known and respected, a man of valor. He was also related to Naomi, and so therefore he could be Ruth's kinsman redeemer. But she doesn't realize that. When she meets him, by being who she was, diligent and faithful and loyal and humble, all of those things, Boaz, this man of great valor and wealth, he takes notice of her. In chapter 8, he says, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." So just in those few verses, she is offered so many things. She is offered companionship with other women. Remember, she's a foreigner. She doesn't have companionship with other people. She's offered protection. Remember, she's a widow, and she doesn't have the protection of her husband. And she's offered refreshment, which I think is so beautiful, that she can go and drink whenever she is thirsty. And I just, that reminds me of our Savior, Jesus, how he offers us all of these things: protection, companionship, and refreshment. Just by staying humble and faithful, she was offered these things. And she says still, in her humility, she says, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you would notice me, a foreigner?" And I know that sometimes we feel like that. Why would God notice me? But that's just the beauty of who he is. He's just that much of a wonderful redeemer. So I think if we walk faithfully and humbly every day, if we're diligent in the places that God has put us, in our workspace, in our homes, in the community, and in our relationships with our finances, if we're just diligent and humble, and we don't sit around and wait for a supernatural burning bush that doesn't always happen. That's not always the way that God gets our attention. But nothing happens by chance. It's not until Ruth gets home that evening that Naomi says to her that Boaz is a kinsman, that he could redeem her. And he's offered her all of these things. So I just think we remember to stay in our everyday diligence, that's how God can use us sometimes, how he uses that to guide us into redemption.